I'm once again in my happy place, surrounded by brand new tyres. It's time for the 2021 Tyre Review's ultra high performance winter tyre test. As these are ultra high performance winter tyres, I won't just be looking at the objective data of the braking distances and lap time. I'll be doing my best to describe the subjective differences in handling too, so you'll know how your car will feel when fitting these tyres. And as a reference, I also have an ultra high performance summer tyre to benchmark the winter tyres against. The winter tyres on test are the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005, the new Continental WinterContact TS870P, the Dunlop Winter Sport 5, the Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance Plus, the GT Radial Winter Pro 2 Sport, the Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3, the Imperial Snowdragon UHP, the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 and the Nokian Snowproof P. We'll also be looking at comfort, noise and rolling resistance, so this should give you the most complete overview when you're trying to decide what the best winter tyre is for your own particular driving. I've been waiting to do this kind of test for about 3 years now, so let's go get testing. Dry handling. Now, firstly, sorry, if you've watched my all-season tyre test, this will all seem quite familiar. That's because the all-season and the winter tyres were tested at the same time. Before I start the results, let me remind you that this is a very stacked group. These are very, very good winter tyres, so you might see an odd result every now and again. And speaking of odd results, the slowest round the track was the Goodyear and the Dunlop pairing, both posting exactly the same time and feeling very similar subjectively. Both were actually controllable, predictable, a little bit of understeer, but they just both lack grip compared to the best in test, but that's often going to be paid back in the wet and the snow. Next up was Hankook and GT Radial, both around a second off the best time. Now, the Hankook was one of the softer feeling tyres in dry handling. Didn't give you much confidence or precision to place the car, but it had reasonable levels of grip. The GT Radial felt like it had some good traction out the corner, but again, just lost it mid-apex. It was a little bit more precise, a little bit more feedback, but you just kind of lost it out laterally, so that gain you got when accelerating seemed to drop off. Fifth, fourth and third was taken by Bridgestone, Continental and Nokian. Now, they all seem to have similar levels of grip. However, the Nokian was the nicest to drive of the trio, just being predictable, giving you some feedback and being nice to place. Second place overall, and trust me, I was as surprised as you when I found out, because we test blind, so I don't know what I'm driving on, was the budget tyre, was the Imperial. Now, don't get used to seeing it up here. I've got a funny feeling it's going to be the only time it gets this high on the scoreboard, but it just felt good laterally. Didn't have the best braking, that's for sure, kind of smeared under braking, but mid-corner, it felt really stable. Almost as if it was a summer compound with just some sipes cut into it. Let's see how that one comes back later in the test. And the best tyre, the fastest around the lap, was the new Michelin Pilot Alpine 5. This tyre wasn't the most fun to drive, but boy did it have a lot of grip. Under braking, under cornering, under traction, it just hung on. So fair play Michelin, you've made a good winter tyre in the dry. Let's see if you can carry that through to the wet and snow, because often they're opposing qualities. As for the summer tyre, well, compared to the heavily siped winter tyres, it was everything you'd expect. It was the fastest around the lap, but not hugely, but 3 degrees, it's still the fastest. A summer tyre will always beat winter and all season tyres in the dry. It was the most direct, it was the most predictable, it was the most darty, it felt the most positive on the brakes. It was just the nicest package all round, but that's the dry, that's where summer tyres often excel in. Let's look at dry braking and then see where that balance changes for the wet. Dry braking was again led by the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 with over a metre gap to the second placed Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3, and Continental placed third with the new WinterContact TS870P. The summer tyre just edged out the winter tyres at the cool 3 degrees centigrade temperatures. Like in dry handling, we are testing at cool Austrian temperatures between 2.5 and 3 degrees centigrade. So this is excellent for testing winter tyres, and quite a rarity in tyre testing, because at those temperatures you can rarely guarantee the weather. So we've been dodging clouds and we've got very lucky. And like in the dry, the group was really close overall, and if you're not already bored of hearing that, you will be before this video's out. Sadly, the group was close apart from the budget tyre. It couldn't repeat its surprisingly strong performance in the dry. Like the budget all-season tyre when we tested it, the grip circle didn't feel bad, it felt even, but it just felt massive, meaning it had no grip in any direction. You were constantly sliding, constantly waiting, and it wasn't a fun experience, because it was just oh, I've turned, are we, aren't we? And this is where the lack of grip of the cheaper tyres comes apparent. In the cold, wet conditions on the road, that would be a noticeable issue for you. So another reminder, avoid cheap tyres. The next group of tyres was Nokian, GT Radial and Dunlop. Now all three of these were around 5% or 2 seconds off the very best, but had slightly different handling characteristics. The Nokian and Dunlop both had a tiny bit of oversteer in the balance, which made the car feel playful, whereas the GT Radial needed to be driven really neatly to get the time, because once it was sliding it just took a little bit longer to get that grip back. Next up were the Continental, Michelin and Goodyear, all around 1.5% or less than a second off the very best of the group. Now the Continental had this safe understeery behaviour, but it felt really numb to the front axle, and as these are performance winter tyres, wasn't my favourite to drive on. The Michelin improved the steering feel a little bit, but just felt quite traction limited out the corners. It felt like I was spinning up the wheels a little bit more than on some of the other tyres, whereas the Goodyear was an easy tyre to drive with just a hint of oversteer helping you around the lap, but nothing scary or unpredictable. Quite an enjoyable tyre. Second place was Hankook. It's only a few tenths on, but I've specifically separated because it was a joy to drive on in the wet. In fact, of the group, even though it wasn't the fastest, it was my favourite to drive on. It was really predictable, had nice steering, nice braking, nice traction, and was just a fun tyre to drive on. So if you're thinking about fun from your winter tyre in the wet, the Hankook's a really good option. And over half a second faster than any other time was another Bridgestone wet grip special result. It was the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005. Now, when I was making my subjective notes, I like to try and guess what tyre's what, because I test blind, so I don't know what I'm driving on. And as we did wet handling after wet braking, which I'll tell you about in a minute, it was clear that this was the Bridgestone from the outset. It was stunning on the brakes. However, it did not feel the most sporty. It was a mid-pack kind of subjective handling tyre. The grip was there, it just wasn't fun to drive. It didn't feel sporty at all. So this is an interesting trade-off between, do you want the very best gripping tyre but lose some of that dynamic subjective handling, or would you rather something like the Hankook, the Goodyear or the Michelin, which are almost there on time and just more pleasurable to drive? That decision isn't down to me, it's down to you, which is why I give you all the data. The summer tyre, well, that did not sit well at these temperatures. It felt like it was sitting on the surface rather than keying into it and generating grip, and you just felt like you were fighting the car around the whole lap. And it wasn't a fun fight. It wasn't, oh, look at me, I'm a hero sliding a car around. It was oh, it's sliding again, come on, grip, 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 and then it wasn't. So a bit of a frustrating experience that really shows in these colder temperatures, summer tyres aren't the best option. Anyway, here's why I could easily guess which tyre was the Bridgestone. The Bridgestone Blizzak LM005's wet advantage continued in wet braking with nearly 1.5 metres advantage to second place Continental. Hankook again placed well, nearly tying with the summer tyre, which fared better in wet braking than in handling. The budget winter tyre stopped over 10 metres behind the Bridgestone, which is a huge difference and could easily be the difference between stopping safely and a crash. There were some interesting differences between straight and curved aquaplaning. Full data can be found on tyreviews.com, but on average the Continental, Goodyear and Hankook performed best across the two tests. As with the all-season test, I was sadly unable to travel to Nokian Tyre's impressive winter testing facility due to travel restrictions, so instead hired a Finnish independent test driver to perform the snow testing. Snow traction was led by the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5, with the Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance Plus in second and the Hankook Winter Icept Evo 3 in third. Snow braking was again led by the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5, this time with the Nokian Snowproof P and Continental WinterContact TS870P in second and third places, which also closely matched the Snow Circle results. Snow handling rounded out the Michelin Flex, with the French tyre again performing the best in the important snow handling test, which makes it a flawless snow performance for the Pilot Alpine 5. The tester said Michelin had excellent overall grip levels, the best balance between the front and rear, and steers effectively even though the rear doesn't slip much. It feels more like a Nordic winter tyre. Goodyear placed second across the snow handling lap, 1.5% behind the Michelin, and described as having a good balance with good front axle grip at all steering angles. The tyre oversteered a little, which helped it round the lap. Third place went to the consistent Hankook, which like the Goodyear had excellent front axle grip at big steering angles and a stable rear axle. And the fourth place Continental had a sharp front end and resisted oversteer very well. As with the all-season test, the summer tyre could barely make it to the circuit, and if I've gone through any of this data too quickly, you can find it all at tyreviews.com, linked in the description. Comfort testing. Now, winter tyres are generally a little bit more compliant. You've got a little bit more block movement with all the siping, so they are a little bit more comfortable than summer tyres, and then this test has proved that again. As for the rest of the group, well, incredibly close, and if you've watched my all-season video, you'll know why it's extra difficult this year. The Golf 8 is a very well damped car and it isolates you in the cabin. The Austrian roads are very, very smooth. So those two combinations of things have made distinguishing the differences between the winter tyres a little bit difficult. So you've essentially got the summer tyre, which probably sits at the bottom, but only by just. It is a comfortable summer tyre. And then if there was one that you had to avoid for comfort reasons, I would say don't pick the GT Radial or the Bridgestone, because both of those, they just felt a little bit firmer. And then when you're handling the tyres with the old sidewall squeeze test, you can feel there's a bit of extra weight in there and a bit of extra stiffness, which makes sense when it transmits bumps to the cabin. If I was going to pick one as an outstanding tyre, it would be the Dunlop and then perhaps the Goodyear. Both these tyres just seem to round off the imperfections a little bit more, transmitted a little less of the jarring bumps through to the cabin. And then when we were going to the off-road section, well, I was calling the off-road section, which is a little bit of dirt I used to try and ascertain some real bouncy imperfections. These two just felt like they were shaking me the least. So if you are looking for that really comfortable tyre, the Dunlop, the Goodyear, and I'm going to say the Conti as well, because that, again, it just seemed to have a little bit more refinement. As this is my first winter tyre test, I've had to reference other tyre tests for the correct score weighting for the overall results, and then add in my own twist. I'll put the weighting used on screen now, and as always, if you have your own preferences for score weighting, you can head over to tyrereviews.com where you can find all the juicy data so you can make up your own results. If you know anything about tyres, you won't be surprised to know that the cheapest tyre on test finished firmly in last position. The Imperial Snow Dragon UHP peaked in dry handling, where it was fast and good to drive on, and it wasn't the noisiest tyre on test, but both those qualities are fairly low priority for a winter tyre. It had one of the longest dry braking by a margin, by far the longest wet braking and the slowest wet handling lap, poor aquaplaning resistance, and it was last overall in the snow testing. Add in a pretty poor rolling resistance and you'll understand why this tyre really isn't suitable for winter driving or recommending. The GT Radial Winter Pro 2 Sport might have finished just one place higher than the Imperial, but it was a significantly better tyre, especially in the key wet test. Sadly, it couldn't match the more expensive group of tyres ahead of it, especially in the snow, so 7th is the best it could place. But GT Radial and their parent company GTI are quickly improving their products, and I look forward to seeing what the future holds for them. The Nokian Snowproof P placed 7th, largely down to the wet performance of the tyre, where it seemed to struggle both in the shallow water of handling and braking and the deeper water of the aquaplaning test. Unusually for Nokian, the snow performance was just okay, but the dry performance was really good. The tyre did have the lowest noise on test, it was comfortable and had low rolling resistance, so it wasn't all bad news. The Dunlop Wintersport 5 placed a well-deserved 6th overall. The tyre was very consistent in nearly all tests with no huge weaknesses other than the slightly slow dry handling lap. Unfortunately, the tyre didn't really excel in any tests either. Wet braking and aquaplaning resistance was a commendable 4th overall, as was snow traction. The Wintersport 5 is worth thinking about if you can find it at the right price. The Dunlop's big brother, the Goodyear Ultra Grip Performance Plus, finished 1st place ahead in 5th. In a lot of ways, it was very similar to the Dunlop. It posted exactly the same dry handling time and had very similar dry braking distances. It had a similar rolling resistance and similar noise levels. However, in the important wet and snow test, it was significantly better, with good wet handling, good aquaplaning resistance, and excellent grip in the snow. Usually, this tyre is priced around the same as the Dunlop, so of the two, it's a bit of a no-brainer for me. The 4th place tyre is the Bridgestone Blizzak LM005. This tyre actually placed 3rd on the scoring system overall, thanks to by far the best wet braking performance and wet handling performance of the group, and the lowest rolling resistance, which is an impressive combination. So why am I telling you it's 4th? I'll try and explain my logic for clarity. While the LM005 was the leader in the wet and was reasonable in aquaplaning, the tyre did perform particularly poorly in dry braking and was off the pace in all the snow tests. Due to the advantage in the wet, the scoring system put the tyre in 3rd, but there's rules in place for these exceptions, and a tyre that was more than 5% off the best in 4 of the key grip tests, that is dry braking, snow handling, snow traction and snow circle, isn't allowed to place in the top 3 tyres in a test. Thanks to the wet performance, this is a great winter tyre for climates like the UK where we rarely see snow, but a truly good winter tyre should be balanced in all conditions, not just excel in one. It's the 3rd place for the Hankook Winter iSept Evo 3, another impressive tyre from Hankook. They certainly seem to be on a roll at the moment. The only deficiencies in performance was a high external noise, high rolling resistance and average dry handling. Everywhere else the tyre excelled. It had the second shortest dry braking, second fastest wet handling lap with my favourite subjective handling, good wet braking, good aquaplaning resistance and very good grip in all 4 snow tests. As I just explained, this is a balanced tyre in all conditions. A better noise and rolling resistance result would have had it right at the front of the group, but it's still a great option for a country with a true winter climate. Highly recommended. And finally, we have a tie for the win between the brand new Continental WinterContact TS870P and the Michelin Pilot Alpine 5, separated by just 0.01%. While the final score was very close and both are exceptional tyres, they did deliver slightly different performances, which is great as you get to pick which one is best for you. The brand new Continental WinterContact TS870P was the king of consistency and is a mighty impressive tyre. In many ways, you could argue that this is the best tyre on test, as the lowest it placed across all 15 categories I score on was 5th in wet handling but only 0.9 seconds off the best, and 5th in snow traction. Every other test was green, meaning it was in the top group of tyres. Interestingly though, it didn't win a single test, but with a string of 4th, 3rd and 2nd places in nearly every single category, you can't help but appreciate the engineering that has gone into this tyre. It essentially has no drawbacks, which is an engineering masterpiece. The Michelin Pilot Alpine 5 was equally as impressive, but for different reasons. The Pilot Alpine 5 won both dry handling and dry braking and was the best in all 4 snow tests. It even had the 2nd lowest noise and the 4th lowest rolling resistance. It lost points in the important wet braking test, where it only managed 6th, where the Continental was 2nd. And while it was the best in straight aquaplaning test, it could only manage 7th in the curved aquaplaning test. I still can't get over the fact it won dry and snow, as they're usually opposing qualities. This is a mighty impressive tyre and certainly one to consider if you live in a heavy winter climate thanks to the mega snow performance. One final note, as I live in the UK and we don't see much snow, I also like to check the results with the snow weighting dropped and the dry and wet increased. With this score weighting, the Continental becomes the exclusive winner of the winter tyre test and the Bridgestone jumps to 2nd place thanks to that stellar wet performance. Something to keep in mind if you live in a mild climate like me and don't want to use an all-season tyre as a winter tyre, which is actually what I do. But that's a topic for another video. There you have it. I hope you've enjoyed the test. I'm sorry it was a little bit more fragmented than usual thanks to global travel restrictions, but hopefully 2022 will mark the return to normal service. Let me know if you're going to fit any of these winter tyres and what you pick, and don't forget to leave a review over at tyrereviews.com to help everyone else out. Any questions, please ask below, and as always, safe motoring.